What is going on, you guys? This is part 4 of my recap for the awesome series 3 Body. As we start episode 16, we pick up where we left off, where Captain Shai and Shu go to visit Shen's husband. At her house, we understand that the man who's always running around writing on pieces of paper and using a bunch of computers is actually her husband. And this time, he was incredibly excited as he finished step 1 of all his calculations, and he wanted to celebrate with them by taking a bunch of shots. And after taking several shots, he passes out in one of the rooms, and Shen gets there to ask what the captain was doing in her house. The captain asks Shen what this man was doing and why he was celebrating, but Shen just responds by saying that he can't really process alcohol well and that was why he was acting so bizarre. As they were walking out, Captain Shai and Shu talk about the nature of Shen and her husband's relationship. Cause when Shen got to the room where her husband was passed out, she was more concerned about the pillow that was on the ground than her husband who was passed out on the floor. And they start to question as to the nature of their relationship and why Shen married this guy if they don't show any affection toward one another. Shen's husband, Wei Cheng, was really smart when he was in high school, but he didn't put any effort into his university studies, including his BA, his master's, nor his doctorate. So he ended up being this mediocre guy teaching college, but he couldn't even hold on to that job. And that was about the time where he met Shen and they got married shortly after. And after their marriage, she financially helped him and funded whatever it was that he wanted to research. And meanwhile, Wang was back inside the game, and together with Von Neumann and Isaac Newton, he was able to complete phase 1 of their computation. And just as they predicted, seconds later, the sun rose and the stable era would last for about a year. But their celebration is cut short as one of the Emperor's astrologers comes rushing to deliver a horrible news. He says that the sun did in fact rise based on the calculations, but not only did the sun rise, it rose parallel to the 2 other suns in the universe. And this is an incredibly rare event that's almost impossible to occur, so people like Newton or Von Neumann didn't really take it into account. And Isaac Newton excuses himself from the Emperor, then steals a horse and runs away, and because all 3 suns rose at the same time and were parallel, their gravitational pull was so strong that everybody in the world started to float and the entire planet was crushed. But even though the game was over and he did in fact lose, Wang receives a phone call from a representative of the game telling him to give personal details as he's now transitioned to another level. He tells Captain Shai about all of this, and Captain Shai thinks it's good news as Wang is getting closer to 3 Body, and they believe that this will somehow shed light on the frontiers of science and how the game and the organization are connected to the deaths of all those scientists. Captain Shai in turn explains himself to Wang, telling him about the recent developments involving Shen. He tells him that Shen has hired a lot of mathematicians and that the 3 Body problem that the game actually tries to solve has now transitioned from physics into mathematics. Wang responds by saying that the problem is still concerned about physics, but it can also be approached from a mathematical point of view. Captain Shai then goes on to ask Wang about his personal relationship with his wife. He asks him if his wife and a cushion fell on the ground, who he would pick up first, but Wang responds by saying that his wife never drinks and that she'll never fall on the ground. All of this is because Wang is trying to make sense of Shen's relationship with her husband and why it is that she needed to marry him. And as Wang and Captain Shai were having their own problems, Mu Xing gets a visit from Mr. Pan. He tells her about the current incident where a bunch of scientists died, and he informs her that the explosion that killed the scientists was just a cover-up to hide something bigger. And after giving her some confidential files, he leaves. But soon after, she recounts another conversation she had with him, and she asks him who the farmer or the shooter may be in their world, and he talks about a primitive tribe, the Hasda in Africa, and tells her that they can go to that tribe and show them all the technological advancement that they have, and for that specific tribe, they, because they're technologically advanced, would almost be like gods to the Hasda. But the point that Mr. Pan was trying to make was that there was a lord, a god, that was more advanced than anyone, and human beings have destroyed the environment trying to reach that level, but they'll never get there before the environment completely collapses. And after Mr. Pan left Mu Xing's office, he goes to Shen's apartment and destroys her husband's computer because he wants them to stop doing his research. He then has a very heated discussion with Shen, and she claims that he's twisting the lord's will to his own needs, and that he started acting on his own without the command of their superior. But even though Shen had a point, Mr. Pan was not letting up. And things were also intensifying with General Chang as other countries forced him to take action against the frontiers of science, because a lot of their scientists seem to be dying under questionable circumstances. There are also pacifists who now turned out to be mobs that are causing a lot of chaos internationally. Most of these people are renowned scientists, and the chaos is stirred by Mr. Pond himself. Apparently he's been calling them to various meetings and putting a lot of radical ideas in their heads. And after Shen's usual lecture about the farmer and the shooter, he visits her again and condemns her for being a redemptionist about the future. He, unlike her, wants the world to end, and he detests the fact that she still has hope. And as our episode comes to a close, it ends with Captain Shai explaining to Wang that at the center of the frontiers of science and the investigation is actually Yi. She is somehow involved in everything, even though they don't have enough evidence, and in the middle of Shai's explanation, Shu comes in telling them that Shan has booked a ticket to go to another city. And they learn that she has a red ginseng factory in the city that she's going to, and Wang remembers Yi giving him some red ginseng a while back. And after doing a little digging, they discovered that there's a connection between Shen and Yi, and they also find out that Yi has also booked a ticket to the same city that Shen was going to. Episode 17 starts with Captain Shai nagging General Chang about those classified files pertaining to Yi. He begs him to declassify it as soon as possible, as he now thinks that Yi is in the center of everything. And as Captain Shai was talking about the red ginseng factory, it sparks something in General Chang, and he immediately leaves to see the files all over again. And in the middle of the night, Wang and Captain Shai make their way to High City to catch up to Shen and Yi as soon as possible. Next, our scene shifts to Shen as she was traveling on the train, and as she was in the restroom, she gets a call from someone telling her that there was an assassin on the train that was sent to kill her. The person who called her gives her specific instructions and tells her to only leave the train once she hears the door knock 3 times. And when Shen does so, the assassin that was outside was no longer there. She then goes across to another section of the train to talk to her commander, and here we witness a surprising reveal when the commander turns out to be Yi herself. And the assassin was taken out by Yi's personal bodyguard, who happens to be quite deadly. Shen asks Yi to hide and to return back home with her guard, but Yi informs her that there's no point now, as they've already traveled halfway. They then have a conversation, and Shen asks Yi, her commander, if she's a redemptionist, an Adventist, or a survivalist, and Yi talks about how when they first asked her to be the commander, she didn't think there would be so many divisions within the group, and she then goes on to talk about the Tower of Babel and how God didn't want people to build it, and so he gave them various languages so they'd be unable to communicate. And Yi just says this, and she doesn't answer the question if she's actually a redemptionist. She just goes on to explain the complexity of their situation. Then for safety's sake, at the next stop, Shen and Yi, along with her guard, leave the train and travel with a car. Meanwhile, Captain Shai and Wang were also in a car, and they were driving to get a train as fast as possible, and when they got there, they hear from one of the train conductors that there was a murder last night on the train. After Captain Shai identifies himself as a police officer, the conductor gives him a description of the assailant and what it was that actually happened last night. Captain Shai can't shake the feeling that this has something to do with Yi and Shen as they were traveling on the same train. But they can't prove that they did anything, as there were no CCTV cameras on the train, and there's also no evidence of them doing anything. Wang tries to disprove Captain Shai's suspicion, telling him that the victim was actually bigger and larger than he was, and he can't imagine both Yi, an elderly woman, or Shen being able to take out somebody with that size. But Shai was still suspicious, and he makes Wang call Yi as she didn't answer him the night before, and this time when he called her, she told him that she was not in Beijing anymore, and when he requested to come to where she was, she agrees without any hesitation. Shen, who was next to her, asks her why she was inviting Wang, but Yi reveals that Wang at some point needs to really find out what's going on with the frontiers of science. Next we see Yi and Shen have made it to their location, and apparently the place that they went to wasn't a factory at all, it was actually the Red Coast base, where Yi used to work as a technician when she was still working for the Communist Party. It looks almost completely abandoned, but when they get inside, we see that there are so many people who identify Yi as their commander, doing various tasks within the facility. And in a bit, Yi tells Shen to shut down the facility, as Yi now believes that there's no point in her team monitoring for anything, as they tried to make contact with their lord for the past 2 years, and Lord chose to contact Mr. Pan instead. And Yi now believes that the only solution is to convince Mr. Pan of something else, instead of going to the lord directly. She sends Shen on her way so that Wang doesn't see them together, and then makes a call to Mr. Pan, who was startled to receive her call, and informs him that she wants to have a meeting. When Wang gets to their meeting location, a farmer drives him to the facility, and Yi takes him on a tour. She recounts her life when she was young and spent most of her days inside the facility, and Wang follows her with fascination in his eyes, as he's never encountered a facility that big before. And as the episode was wrapping up, Wang raises the question as to what the purpose of the facility facility was, and Yi tells him that since he's made it so far, there's no harm in telling him at this point, and she goes back to narrate the story that she was telling him a couple of days ago. And we see that when she got transferred to the core, Lei would tell her that her new responsibilities would be to monitor space activities and space communication. And we see the young Yi being entrusted with the new responsibility of monitoring a bunch of satellite activities in space. Yang was still against the idea of having Yi on the team, but Lei was adamant that she was the right choice for the job, and most of all, that she can do the job really well. Yi goes on to tell the story to Wang, and she explains that as time went on, even though Lei trusted her with everything, she only had a fragment of the information required to make any attempt at discovering anything, as bureaucracy inside the Red Coast base was very high. She had to teach herself new things from scratch just to keep up with the others, and that was not easy, but she kept doing it as she believed in herself and the Red Coast project. And one day she would decipher information from a space satellite of the West, and she'd present photographic evidence to Yang. But the only response that she got from him was to keep working and to change frequency and discover something else. And then Yi discovers something interesting. When Wang asks her if Yang was the one back then that was holding her back from making any discoveries, she goes on to say that it wasn't the case. It was actually the opposite. And here our scene quickly shifts to General Chang and Shai, and Chang has finally declassified those files pertaining to Yi, and on the phone he informs Captain Shai that he's not gonna believe what he found. But the person that breaks the news to us is Yi herself, as she tells Wang that Lei has been lying to her all that time, and the only reason Yang got in his way and tried to stop him was because he knew that what he was telling her was a lie. The Red Coast base didn't have anything to do with espionage or spying on the West. The real reason was much more dangerous and much more interesting. The Red Coast base was a competition facility with the West, but competition in order to discover extraterrestrial beings in outer space before the West does so. And Yi's told of this one day after a committee hearing, and she officially becomes a part of the Red Coast team, and she's given the official documents highlighting the true purposes of the Red Coast base. Yang tried to tell her to back down as the project was top secret, and if she truly found out what was going on, there was truly no way for her to ever go back to normal society. But Yi lost everything she knew so far, and she really didn't have anything to go back to, and she decided to discover the truth of what was going on inside the facility. And as Wang hears this, he himself is shocked, as this was not really what he was thinking about. All the experiments that the Red Coast base was trying to do was to transmit a signal as far to the universe as possible to reach extraterrestrial beings and explain what human beings are, what they're capable of, what they need, and most of all, which community of human beings has made that specific communication possible. And the moment Yi found out the truth, she was more devoted than ever. She dedicated all her time and all her efforts in the hopes of reaching a civilization beyond her own. Wang counters this, saying that the technology that they had back then was really immature, and even if they tried their hardest, they'd be sidetracked by the technology of their time. But Yi explains that as a radio transmitter, the facility was in tip-top shape, and they were monitoring a vast domain inside space, and even though it wasn't as big as the European space, the Red Coast-based satellite had a lot of power, and so many people, including people in the government that knew, lay their hopes on it. Back then, they took every precaution that they could possibly think of to maintain their safety, and as time went on, hope did not dwindle, as the facility kept getting a lot of upgrades in order to assist with their main objective, which was contacting extraterrestrial beings. But as time went on and it was the 1970s, people started to lose faith, and even Yi herself began to question her purpose. A matter of fact, the funding for the facility started to dwindle down, and even security that was incredibly high and very tight now only accounted for 5 guards at the door. Because the staff was immensely cut down, Lei, who still believed in the project but was still skeptical, had to do a bunch of technical work instead of serving as a political commissary as he should. And soon, Yi heard the emptiness of the universe and how there was truly nothing out there. She explains that if there was indeed a Type 2 or Type 3 civilization that was able to harness the power of the galaxy, even if human technology was not able to reach their signals, humans should have been able to hear and track theirs. And as time went on, Yi as a scientist lost her faith, and she understood that she was alone in the universe, and that thought, that realization, broke her as a person, as her heart was full of hope that can never be quenched. And the next thing she recognized was that she stopped living, and the only thing she noticed was that time went on and she just became an old woman. As episode 19 opens, we see Wang returning back to where he came from, and he meets up with Captain Shai, who tells him that he also heard from General Chang about the true purpose of the Red Coast base which was to discover aliens in outer space. Captain Shai thinks about everything they witnessed so far, including the incident on the train, and he tells Wang that he can't arrest Shen or Yi and interrogate them in any way as he has no evidence. And he's now quite confused as to what's going on because this whole alien thing has caught him off guard. And speaking of Yi, after she made the call to Mr. Pond, he sends the person named Evans to her location. It was the first time that Evans made it to the Red Coast base, and he first talks about how unnerving it was to be there at that location and witness a facility that big that was surrounded by concrete and steel. He refers to it as a pilgrimage or a predestined bonding with the location, and as their conversation continues, we understand that this Evans person has great reverence for the location and for Commander Yi herself. He calls her a spiritual leader, and he also talks about a group titled ETO. Yi was apparently the one that indoctrinated him to the whole idea of the Lord, and Evans happens to be one of her first followers. He talks about a time when he was alone and lonely and didn't have any path in life until Yi came along and showed him the way. They then go on to talk about something really interesting as we realize that the Red Coast base operation didn't just stop at the origin of the Red Coast base, it actually continued at a base that Yi referred to as Red Coast Base 2, and this was about 19 years ago when Yi and Evans worked together to make contact with Lord. They were very passionate about the project and had with them a team that was equally as curious and as passionate as they were. The whole purpose of their movement was to invite Lord to their civilization to reform humans. They imagined a world with no sin and chaos, and a world that was empoisoned by human greed. And at the time, the only way they could picture such a world was through the intervention of Lord. Evans then goes on to say that human beings will be destroyed and that the planet will be saved as it should finally, and whether or not Yi believes the same things that Evans does, he tells her that nothing is stopping the Lord from arriving. Our scene next shifts to Wang and Captain Shai going through the declassified documents and cross-checking the fact that Yi told Wang with the actual evidence that's now in their hands. And everything that Yi said and told Wang about her discoveries and about the purpose of the Red Coast base was all contained in the files that were declassified. But the very keen and observant Xu Bingbing finds something odd within the files. Here we find out that Yang, that was very harsh to Yi when she was young, actually ended up marrying her, but he also died in the Red Coast base on the very same day where Officer Lei died. This was very suspicious to hear for Captain Shai, who already suspects Yi to be part of the group of the Frontiers of Science, but now he places her at the center of his investigation. And later, Captain Shai coerces Wang to go see Yi again and ask her questions about space and if she truly believes in the existence of aliens. And after their conversation, Yi doesn't really give him an answer, but she gives him a very vague comment about how anything is possible. When Wang tells this to Captain Shai gets very frustrated because he can't arrest Yi and interrogate her, and he knows that she knows a lot about the Frontiers of Science, and yet she's still beating around the bush. But fortunately for him, he gets a call from the general, sending him to a secure location where they find Shen's husband. Apparently he's been staying there for quite a while now, and the general let him do his calculations, and he told the officer that was guarding him to only let Wang and Captain Shai in after 4 hours, because by then he'll be done with all his calculations and make a discovery. So the two wait for him inside their car for about 5 hours. They then get inside his very messy room, and he tells them just how he ended up the way he did. As a child, he was very gifted in mathematics, but just like his teacher thought, he didn't really care that much about it, and his life was very mediocre. But one day, he goes to a friend of his father's, who also happens to be Mr. Han at the Buddhist temple, who tries to teach him the concepts of Buddhism. But whatever he did, he never really understood, and he could never get his mind to become empty. And the very same night Mr. Han explained the concept to him, he tried to fall asleep but couldn't, and that's when he tried to empty his mind and meditate. As he was meditating, he couldn't fathom the emptiness that was inside of him, so he decided to make 2 identical spheres inside his mind. But unfortunately, since the spheres were identical in every way, their gravitational pull was also equal, and their movement was predictable, and this made him even more anxious. And so he decided to make a 3rd sphere that was slightly different, and this time, the 3 odd spheres attracted each other in ways that even he himself couldn't imagine, and he accidentally, for himself, discovered the 3-body problem, and for the very first time, he was able to calm his mind and find purpose in his life in solving the 3-body problem. Wei Cheng's explanation continues on episode 20, and he talks about how the first few months at the Buddhist temple was quite difficult for him, as he didn't even have a calculator, and the only things provided were pen and paper. He'd work all day and night and scribble on those pieces of paper and fall asleep when he was incredibly tired, until one day he got a visitor who was obsessed with his work and was fascinated by his personality. And this person was Shen. Her mathematical abilities were pretty high, and unlike all the people that came to the temple to take pictures or to settle down, Shen was an academic, and she was also trying to solve the three-body problem. He was already pretty out of it at the time, and he didn't take her word seriously, especially when she asked him to come live with her, cause she'll be able to provide him with supercomputers to do all his computing, and he wouldn't just have to rely on his mind alone. After he left her room, he couldn't fall asleep, so he goes out to take a walk, and then he finds her praying to the Buddha, saying that she wants her lord to stop experiencing misery. Wei was not a religious person, but this caught him off guard, and he would speak to Mr. Han about it. Mr. Han would be troubled, and he would tell him that this woman is dangerous and probably has seen things that they can't even imagine, and he urges Wei not to go with her, but Wei couldn't stay in the temple for long, so he decides to do it. And as promised, Shen would provide him everything that he wanted for his research, and for once in his life, Wei has never felt more fulfilled, as nobody ever bothered him, and the only thing he did day in and day out was just calculate his results. But one day, seeing that they have a common cause, Shen asks him to marry her, and Wei agrees. He then goes on to talk about how he completed his model for the three-body problem, and he's not completely sure if it works or not, but before he explains that, he tells them why he's here, and the reason was that Mr. Pan Han came to his house and threatened him to stop his calculations, but on the very same night, his own wife, Shen, told him that she would kill him if he did indeed stop, and he felt incredibly conflicted and decided to come here to police custody so he'll be able to finish his model. Then oddly enough, he recognizes Wang as a responsible person, and he finally gives him his findings to the three-body problem, but urges him to choose to stay away from the frontiers of science and the three-body problem. Wang immediately calls Shen, who was already aware of her husband's whereabouts, and he tells her that he came up with the model finally, and she was very excited and tells him to join the game so they can try the model inside. And this time, when Wang logs inside the game, the civilization has reached the information era, and there he meets Albert Einstein, who seems to be freaked out by every situation. He tells Wang that the last time he logged in and worked with the Emperor, him and von Neumann came really close to discovering everything, but Einstein has lost his mind in the game as he's figured out that it's impossible to predict the movements of the trisolar sun. Wang tries to explain that all that was lacking in his formula last time during the last civilization was Einstein's theory of relativity, but Einstein talks about how even his theory can't be the center of his calculations, as he's now completely convinced that it's impossible to predict the trisolar star movement. And in just a bit, Shen logs inside the game and meets with Wang, and then they go to the leaders of the UN and they present their paper. The paper contained in it the model that Wei created, but after looking at it for a bit, they inform them that better people have come up with better results, and they urge them to currently look up at the sky and look at the moon. So far in the game, they've never observed a moon, especially one that was so big. And the UN representatives inside the game explained to Wang that there was a new factor that he or Shen didn't consider, and that was the Great Rip. The Great Rip was when the stars would come close to the sun and move parallelly straight toward the planet without stop until the sun completely liquefies and melts. And Wang's model didn't take this into account, as there were no prior investigations into the giant moon, which is an indication that the Great Rip will happen. They also built a pendulum, as they suspect that it's the only way to predict when the chaotic era will end, and moments later, Shen leaves the game telling Wang that he's the chosen one and to figure out a solution one way or another for the sake of humanity. And as soon as she left, he is informed by one of the representatives that there is no way to predict the trisolar star movement, and that the only thing they can do is just gamble with the universe. And about 400 years later, this civilization was also destroyed by two parallel suns, and it's revealed inside the game that this civilization is a milestone, as the contestants have finally realized that there is no solution to the three-body problem. And next, something really interesting happens as Mr. Pan visits the very depressed Shen, as she lost hope in humanity in solving the three-body problem, but he tells her that the game was just there for her to understand Lord, and not to think that he needed to be redeemed or that he was in misery. And just after he said this, Mr. Pan pulls out his gun and he shoots Shen right in the head. And as the episode comes to a close, we see Wang getting to the crime scene, and he meets Shu and Captain Shai there, but luckily for them, because of the cameras inside the house, they've realized that the last person that visited Shen was Mr. Pan himself, and the episode wraps up with Captain Shai telling Shu to find him at all cost. Let's collect 1500 likes under this video, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to watch the rest of this series. So please, subscribe.